Good evening. My name is Shailesh Shirali. I will be introducing the program for this evening and I'll be making a few remarks. First of all, I welcome you to this occasion. It is the annual feature, the talk given of the CCD, Center for Continuing Dialogue. So I'm going to start by saying something about the CCD. The tradition of the CCD started soon after Krishnaji's passing away in 1986. It was thought that since he had these public gatherings, something along those lines should be continued, though of course he would not be present. Since then, we have experimented with different formats, ranging from panel discussions to talks by individuals. And currently, it is the latter format that we use, that is talks by individuals. In the early years, it was panel discussions. Over the years, we have had speakers from the fields of science, environmental activism, the performing arts, and religious inquiry. So it's been a wide variety of speakers who have come here. I'm very happy to welcome and introduce our speaker for this evening, Javier Gómez Rodríguez. He is from Spain. He encountered Krishnamurti's teachings as a teenager and found them deeply impactful. Over the years 1975 to 1978, he studied at Brockwood Park, which is one of the Krishnamurti schools in England, where he met Krishnamurti. He also collaborated with the renowned physicist and philosopher David Bohm, engaging in profound explorations of thought and dialogue. Javier pursued his studies in the US after that, earning an MA in Spanish language and literature, and briefly taught at the University of Texas. Later, he returned to Europe, becoming a teacher at Brockwood and deepening his involvement in Bohm's dialogue proposal. After Bohm's death in 1992, he served as a resident scholar right here at the KFI, Vasanta Vihar, from 1993 to 95, then returned to Spain and worked for the Spanish Foundation. There, he translated Krishnamurti's works into Spanish and became a trustee of that foundation. He joined the Krishnamurti Link International and edited its magazine, which is called The Link. He also facilitated a Bohm-inspired dialogue group in Spain and published a book on an overview of dialogue, exploring the transformative potential of dialogue. Since 2000, he has been in the Netherlands, working with the Dutch Krishnamurti Committee. Since 2016, he has offered an online course on Krishnamurti's teachings titled The Book of Yourself. And he's currently working on transforming his research into a book. So as you may have seen the flyer which was shared with everyone some time back, his talk this evening is titled The Vicious Circle of Conflict. He plans to explore the various strands that go into the making of conflict: fear of emptiness, pursuit of inward and outward security, the movement of self-fulfillment, attachment to people, to things, and to beliefs, ideas, conformity to tradition and authority, and the division between what is and what should be. And finally, the breakdown in relationship. So he will be exploring all these various strands in his talk, which will take up about 45 minutes. After the talk, there will be time for questions. So I'd like to announce a few things in that context. First of all, questioners are requested to keep their questions brief and question-oriented rather than discourses. Please don't start expounding on some ideas. Put across a brief, compact question which Javier can respond to. And also, I'd like to request everyone to switch off their cell phones. Let it not disturb the occasion once it begins. So before I request Javier to start, I'd like to also announce that the KFI has just released some publications, very important publications for the public. First is a book called That Revolutionary Discontent. It has just been released. It's new material. And just to say what is there on the blurb at the back, there's a quote from Krishnamurti where it says, "Sirs, is there a very great difference between the young and the old? Youth, the young people, if they are at all alive, are full of revolutionary ideas, full of discontent, Are they not? They must be, otherwise they are already old. And the book itself consists of a number of dialogues held between Krishnamurti, 11 conversations, and young people, but these were not at universities or any formal get-togethers, but rather held in the houses where Krishnamurti stayed during his annual visits to India. So he talks about the fundamental difference between functional knowledge, which is necessary for survival, and psychological knowledge. So these are themes which he has explored at length in various talks, and it's there in this book. So please do have a look at it. It is being released, it's available right here at a discounted price. And the other announcement is about the publication of this book, The Collected Works of Krishnamurti. So this is, of course, is not a new publication. It has been around. It was used to be available, I think, as a paperback edition. This is a hardback edition. And we are taking pre-orders for this book. It's a very valuable resource, 17 volumes altogether. So do have a look at the counter later. So without any further delay, let's invite the speaker to talk about the vicious circle of conflict. Javier?
Thanks, Shailesh. Can you all hear me? Yeah? Okay. I'm not used to speak with a microphone, so... First of all, I want to thank KFI for the opportunity to be here once again. It's like a homecoming for me. I had 2 wonderful years here in retreat and study some years ago. And it was an important moment in my life. I had to make a halt and take stock of my journey, and therefore consider which way I was going and examine myself as deeply as I could. And KFI was generous enough to let me be as lazy as I wanted to be in order to look at myself. And that was a great gift for which I will always be grateful. So, as Shailesh explained, this talk is being given under the auspices of the Center for Continuing Dialogue. As I understand the term dialogue, it means basically a conversation in which we are inquiring, in this context, into fundamental questions. One thing that Shailesh had told me about the purpose of this event is to look at contemporary issues or problems of modernity in the light of the teachings. So that is what we're going to do. And we chose the subject of conflict because that's very alive at the moment in the world. There is an impending sense of war. Not only are there a few wars already in progress, brutal things that go day after day in the most barbaric, brutal manner, and which nobody seems able or willing to stop. As Krishnamurti used to point out, that he mentioned a figure that in the last 3,000 years, 5,000 actually, there had been 5,000 wars. So there is 1 war per year, according to a simple division, but I suspect it was more. As you can see, there are several wars going now, as I said, which is very worrisome. And the political powers that are there are just inching towards it and talking about it as though there's no tomorrow. We are a mad civilization, and most civilizations have been mad. We have not solved the problem of violence. We have not solved the problem of war. We have not solved the problem of the division between one human being and another. We have, in fact, not solved the division within ourselves. And this is not a personal matter only. This concerns the whole world. Now, as we are all here gathered today, I would like to just express the spirit in which these talks, or talks like these, are held, which is in the spirit of our sharing our human predicament, that we are all involved in it. K. Krishnamurti, sometimes I will refer to Krishnamurti as K, by the way, and without meaning any disrespect, because he used to refer to himself that way also. He did not want to give any importance to himself, although the importance that he had is obvious as well. But it's not a question of personalities, and it's not a question, above all, of authority. That in the spiritual world, there is no authority. That the truth that one may find and express is only that the word is not the thing. Krishnamurti always reminded us of that. And that what he expressed was the truth that we must find out for ourselves. So his speaking it doesn't necessarily transfer truth. Truth cannot be given to another. It has to be discovered. And yet the word has the purpose of conveying something of the direction, the point, the nature of that truth. So listening is important, but as what we're talking about concerns us all, we should look at our own existence, take it in hand, because it's not an abstract subject that we'll talk about it in somewhat abstract terms, but something that affects, concerns our daily lives. We're all involved in the world. As Krishnamurti said, you are the world and the world is you. So there's no separation, and also there's no implicit separation between me on this platform and you. So that is the spirit, more or less, of friendship, of commonality, of the shared condition in which we are, and the inquiry in which we are involved. Is a dialogue, though I'm going to talk for a while. So, the question of conflict has been there with us from the beginning. And we all know it in our own personal lives as well as in the broader spectrum of the world. The question of war, you see, the other day, friends of mine took me to see a movie about Indira Gandhi. And they call The Emergency. The amount of violence that in the country of non-violence exists or has existed is unbelievable. We can talk about non-violence, but there is violence. And we are violent. And it manifests itself in so many ways. Conflict is on the large scale and on the smaller scale. It has to do with people actually fighting over something, but it has to do with contradiction as well. It's in us, is everywhere. Krishnamurti used to say, humanity has two major issues only, two major problems. One is violence, and the other is sorrow. If we can solve those, I dare not say what, because we haven't solved them, right? But we have to solve those. Those are the primary issues we're facing. Just think about it. That's already helpful, because humanity thinks it has so many other problems. But at the end of the day, we only have two. And they're clearly related. Violence leads to sorrow. All violence is sorrow. Though not all sorrow may be violence. I do not know. I haven't gone far into it. So think about that we are faced with these two issues as human beings, the way we are. We can see also another thing that Krishnamurti clearly pointed out, that in terms of the human condition, the inner and the outer are not separate things. We can't take war as something separate from ourselves. He put it very beautifully, which is, he said, war is the spectacular and bloody expression of our daily lives. That involves us all very directly. It's not only that it is our daily lives, but it is the structure of consciousness. So what we're going to do, or what I'm going to try to do, and bear with me, This will not be complete, and therefore it will be up to you to also see where the gaps may lie or what other aspects you see afterwards and ask questions about it. But I'm going to try and lay out the map, a certain map of the spectrum of conflict and what I called the vicious circle. You can see that violence, conflict repeats itself. We are stuck in a pattern. And it's a pattern that is not just now, of our time, of each of us because of our background, but in consciousness itself. That's what I'm going to try and approach, tentatively also, so it's all tentative, in order to explore the deeper implications of such a question, that conflict is not outward, but also inward. That the inner and the outer, like Kay used to say in a beautiful metaphor, is like the ebb and flow of the tide. And that is what we are, this tide. But the inner has prevalence over the outer. That's what we don't seem to understand either. We're sort of looking for technological solutions to our human problems, and that will never happen, because those problems have a simple origin in the very structure of consciousness. Consciousness itself, as Krishnamurti will point out, or has pointed out, is in a contradiction with itself. That's very hard to perceive, you see? But we have to get there. It's in our own thinking, it's in our own way of seeing, thinking, feeling, that the structure of conflict is embedded. And that is in our common consciousness, in the consciousness of humanity. That's why he put the emphasis always on self-knowledge. Know yourself, yourself meaning the whole of mankind, in this structure of consciousness. So that is the major global perspective, let's say, that covers this chapter. Now, one of the also important in terms of self-knowledge, because Krishnamurti presented his teachings as a reading of the book of humanity, the book of mankind. What's Krishnamurti doing? He's reading what we are, what all humanity is. He's actually doing that work, himself did it, of course, in order to show us what is the map of consciousness, what is the map of our relationships, what is the real map of the world, the inner map of the world. So when he did this, you see, there was a beautiful talk. I recommend you read it. The second talk that he gave in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, Sri Lanka, in 1980. And it was entitled, because they picked it out apart, because it was very special, entitled, there's a little booklet called The Book of Life. And there Krishnamurti takes his poetic license and describes this book. That the first chapter, you see, after the introduction, how to listen and watch, observe, you see that we're not really going to touch on that, unfortunately. So after the preface, he goes and says, what does the first chapter say? So the first chapter, according to him, in this inward journey of self-discovery and transformation, is conflict. So spirituality has to deal with reality. We have to start from where we're at. And conflict is the symptom, the signal, the sign that we are not whole, that we have not discovered the way of true relationship or love, also not true values, because the values that we have obviously separate us and lead to injustice, violence, oppression, and finally to what Krishnamurti called organized murder of war. So you can see that this is actually a tragic perspective that we're looking at, and we have to take that seriously. So think about it. Maybe you haven't been in war, but many people have been. And just about every generation has been there. So that's just historical. But you see, we are at the root and source of history. Krishnamurti said consciousness is the history of mankind is in human consciousness. If we read that consciousness, we've read the book of mankind, we read history. And the point is to put an end to history. See, historians talk about the end of history, but I don't think they know what they're talking about. What we're talking about history, the ending of history has to do with this. the ending of the process of psychological causation that brings these calamities about in a circular, vicious way. That's part of the vicious circle of conflict, that it returns. The fact that it returns is also an indication of our lack of understanding, of our lack of commitment, of our lack of concern, of our lack of seriousness ultimately, in terms of meeting these two fundamental problems that Krishnamurti has pointed out, of violence and sorrow, which calls for self-understanding and freedom. So what is this conflict? Everywhere, we said, we know it very well, is at home and abroad. Everywhere, and is within. These birds, marvelous. I love it. I mean, that was one of, look, the bats. The fruit bats is marvelous. Such a joy being in this oasis. Well, anyway, then forgive me that I diverge. So Krishnamurti offers one simple insight. Sounds simple, as it is stated, as the key to all conflict, which is that where there is division, there must be conflict. And he says, this is a law. Now, I haven't heard K in anywhere else saying this is a law. So I call it Krishnamurti's law. Law meaning in the scientific sense, right? If A, then B follows necessarily. The law of gravity, the law of this, the law of that. So he says this is a mathematical, scientific thing. Psychologically, where there is division, there must be conflict. It's not my division or distance from a chair or from this microphone. I don't have a conflict at the moment with this microphone or with anyone, right? But psychologically, there are distances, there are divisions. That's where the problem lies. So he says, as long as that is the case, we will have conflict. Now, how does this manifest? What's the division? What kind of divisions? So you say, he always starts outwardly and moves inwardly, which is psychologically, he says, nationalism. He starts with nationalism. You know this. Why is nationalism such a problem? What's the division? Well, it has a border. It has is in a competitive struggle with other nations. It has an army. Just think about it, the nature of the army. What is an army? For me, an army is the structural aspect, the institutionalized and structural integration of violence into the state, which means that collectively we have accepted violence. It's part and parcel of the social structure. Look at it, and the amount of resources that are going into that, into sustaining that murderous industry. We don't even speak like this. You won't hear a politician speak like this, right? They have power, they have money, they have position, prestige, and all that stuff, and don't seem to care about human life. So we have to really be serious ourselves in terms of putting things in proper perspective. That these politicians in the world are a grave danger. They really are. And they are getting dumber and dumber, and they're becoming more dangerous because they have more power, right? And science is helping. You understand? They're getting better and better. And you know, the atom bomb is still waiting to explode. There are plenty of those just to wipe us all out. And they're waiting for a little idiot to put some press some button. What about us? What about human life? What about life? What about those bats? Who cares? Don't we care? Do we care? So this is an appeal also for us to awaken to our total responsibility. And if we have so-called democratic regimes, it's our responsibility not to elect these people, not to have any governments who are promoting this kind of stuff. Difficult, impossible, we don't know, but we have to have the right conscience in order to transform the world. And as Kay says, that transformation begins with you. If you are not ambitious, violent, sectarian, then we already have a beginning of a transformative movement. It begins with us. And we will find out what we are in that relationship how we are with one another, if we are using one another, if we're exploiting one another, if we are driven by ambition, by lust, by power. That's the world. Look at the world. What is it driven by? And it's not the world because it's consciousness. Consciousness is animalistic. Look at it. You have fundamentally three movements. If you looked at your own consciousness, you will have seen three primary movements, three primary objects. One is pleasure with its pain. One is security with its fear. And one is hierarchy, power with its failure. This is the monkey. Any monkey tribe that has been studied has these three factors involved in its survival strategy. The territorial, so nationalism. The hierarchical, the structure of power. That has a border, that therefore has already a division. And violence is implicit because you must defend your territory from external enemies. And you must defend your power from the internal ones. That's the structure of society, and that's the structure of the psyche. Okay, I would speak in these terms of saying that part of our problem, of our conditioned, deep psychological conditioning, is that this biological has seeped into the psychological. That thought essentially serving the purposes of these fundamental survival strategies. But those turn out to be, it may work for the monkey, but it does not work for us. Because we have become ruthless, violent, and self-destructive. We have to understand that we are the other. If we were to understand just that, we would have solved a lot of problems. If we were to see that we are humanity, each of us embodies that wholeness, we would not be able to kill anyone. We have to dehumanize them first. You realize what is happening? We have to dehumanize people in order to destroy them. Meaning alienate ourselves from another so completely that we cannot recognize them as ourselves. But if we were to do that, then we would not be able to do it. See, that's a primary aspect of compassion. If we were to see that, then we will feel for another. And therefore, that violence would stop right there and then. Right? To become aware of how destructive our self-centered movement is. I want security. Everybody wants security. That's one of the monkey principles. That's what the politicians always talk about. National security. Now, that's a very primal, instinctual, biological drive. It's not to be denied. Every little animal needs his own security and will fight for his little hole. See? Maybe we are just like that. You say, oh, it's nature at work. Wait a minute. We're supposed to have a neocortex. We're supposed to have another function. Supposed. Okay? So there is this animal thing of security, and that has its place. And Krishnamurti would understand or understood that there is a basic necessity and importance of security. That is, in terms of food, clothes, shelter. But really, our real security comes from relationship. Comes from right relationship with another. Non-oppressive relationship, non-divisive, non-violent relationship. Right? That's where it comes from, security. But where do we seek security? Not in food, clothes and shelter, which we might easily share intelligently with one another and avoid all these catastrophes of hunger and all that in the world. But we seek them in ideas. Thought creates its own objects and fields of security. The nation is created by thought. A religion and a belief is created by thought. We are seeking security in the field of thought. And thought is seeking security in the field of identity. It gets complicated pretty quickly and very subtle. But identity can only exist. Identity means identification. I'm a Spaniard. I'm a Catholic. See, the I am becomes the center of our existence, and that has a collective dimension, and it has a tradition behind it. You can only identify with the past. You can't identify with the present. You cannot even identify the present. It's just moving like a river, right? So you can't, look, that's a very interesting observation. You can only identify with the past, or with a projection into the future, of course, right? Like the communists, we identify with the utopia of how we're going to transform things. But the present is not there. We have to come back to the actuality. We are in a contradiction with ourselves and with our own purposes because we lean on the past to provide security in belief, in racial identification, in the claiming of a territory for that race, in the political tendency, you name it. Those are all past historical events. We live in time, our psyche is time, but time is rooted in the past as memory, and therefore it has an implicit contradiction, is in an implicit contradiction with life. This is the fundamental contradiction, even beyond, one country and another, because both are rooted in the past, and one chooses to identify with one tradition and the other with another. That's one of the reasons why Krishnamurti would say that tradition means to betray. It's not quite, I looked it up in the dictionary and it's a bit vague, the etymology. But you can see the meaning from his perspective, which is, if you live in the past, we live in the past, and the past is what we are identified with, becomes our person, our being, then that being is imposing itself on the present, is betraying the wholeness of life. So the fundamental question of conflict is not just between one person and another, but it's this at the root of this, in this field of living in the past, from the past, for the past, and its projections into the future. The time-bound nature of consciousness, which is the nature of self, is the primary factor, according to what I understand Krishnamurti to have meant, of this division and conflict. So we have to go there. We have to perceive how time is present in our existence, how we look out on each other with time, how we define ourselves as time, and how time will remain forever limited and will create its own border and will not allow us to meet. Okay, calls it images, that we build images and seek security in images, religiously, political, social, etc. Now, is that correct? Because an image is just a reflection of something, has no substance, but thought gives it the importance of being, right? But in fact, what it's caught into, it's becoming. I don't know if you studied Krishnamurti sufficiently to understand the deep significance of that word in the context of the teachings, which is the self being rooted in the past is invariably deficient because it's ever incomplete. So it has to complete itself. It has to become. And what it's trying to become is a projection, is an image. There's this division between what is and what should be. And he's always trying to bridge that gap. We are violent, but we should not be violent. So there we go. See, it's a bit complicated because it's not just merely a matter of creating ideologies and pursuing those noble ideals and become that. That very division is another division and therefore another conflict. So the discipline Krishnamurti invites us to learn is this non-division in terms of seeing the actuality. You understand? That they're not to understand division and end it, we must approach it in a non-divisive way. Therefore, not with time, because time is the factor of division. It gets subtle, but beautiful if you follow it, right? The subtlety and the beauty of it, because that's immediate. We always look out of time. the self is time, and the self is the one that observes. As the self observes, what does it observe with? With his own memory, with his own projections, with his own beliefs. Look, knowledge and belief is where humanity has put its faith in terms of ascending to a better position and creating the greater security for itself. What Kay question said, because it said, first of all, we believe because we want assurance. We want certainty in a world that is uncertain. It's a way of countering the fear that we are nothing and that there is no fundamental security. That's where he brings it ultimately, to this feeling that we're caught internally, psychologically, in a vicious circle which originates in this fear. We're afraid to be nothing. We're afraid to be alone. We're afraid of not being. This is the very movement of becoming. Becoming, I mean, there's more to it, but the movement of becoming is an escape. Fear is a movement away from this encounter with nothingness that seems to deny us so radically. Becoming is time, is the projection of fulfillment in time. The nothingness at the root of our being says you are not that. And time is not the way of being, it's the way of becoming. But fear sends us that way. First, because we feel insecure if we seek security. That's just the law. We seek security how? By identifying with people, with things, with ideas, becoming attached to them, to beliefs. See, if you look at us, that's what we're made of. Right? Made of these attachments, these identifications, these beliefs, in a way to counter the fear of not being. Fear is behind it, and we're just escaping from it. That leads to this whole social structure of authority, conformity to tradition, and the following of those, what is the past, conformity particularly, because it's also part of survival. Society controls our lives, right? So if they say you believe in this, then you have to believe in this, or otherwise they send you to somewhere or out of the society. It's an old primitive method of punishment. And then from there, you see what happens is the moment one conforms, accepts the impositions of authority, we are in a contradiction with ourselves. We have this, and also the moralities. Society says you have to behave, and therefore it says this is the ideal. You have to deny first what you are, and then go for this. So we spend our life in what Krishnamurti called the corridor of the opposites. So even society, religion, at least Christian religion, in the name of the good, condemns us to an everlasting struggle with ourselves. That's not the way of freedom. That's not the way of liberation and wholeness. That's not the religious way. Right? This what it does is denies relationship, breaks it down, denies sensitivity, denies intelligence, denies love. If you deny those three things, which is what our social traditional conditioning does, then we're denying our very wholeness. See, we're in a total contradiction that way. But we do that. We break relationship down, we deny love, and then where do we end? Back in loneliness, back in the fear of not being. And if you're not very attentive, the circle starts again. Right? This is my sense from reading Kay as to how he discovers in the center of consciousness, in the very nucleus of it, an internal vicious circle of contradiction, because it is fundamentally escaping from itself. The truth of the matter is that inwardly, psychologically, we are nothing. That all these identifications also are nothing, and they're a very dangerous situation because they're at the root of division, conflict, and sorrow. Is that too depressing? I hope not. It's a deep diagnosis, if you look at it, and I think it's as accurate as far as I can grasp it, right? There may be even more to it as to where the root of conflict lies. Huh? There may be more to it, but you can see if you take that fundamental principle, that where there is division, or law, that where there is division, there must be conflict, and you apply it, you take it step by step, see? What separates us, in what way we divide, how the self is at the center of division, how in fact the escape from what one is a fundamental error that condemns us to violence and sorrow. I think we have a key, we have a potential already for transformation and for ending conflict at the very source. We can forget about the United Nations, and we can forget about our politicians, and we can forget about our scientists and all those employees. Finita la musica. This is over. This is up to us, therefore. You see, this is the beautiful, empowering thing about case teachings, that they bring it all back home, that they bring it all to us, that in each of us is the wholeness of humanity, and we can put an end to the whole phenomenon if we are capable and serious enough, you are passionate enough to go there, to dare to face our fear, to dare to face our pain, to dare to face our ignorance. Huh? We had to not escape. Krishnamurti closed all doors. I thought, what a merciless teacher. He will not leave any escape, no room for escape, because that's fundamental. The human problem is a problem of escape, of evasion of the fundamental fact. So we have to begin there. No way out this way. The only way out is the way in. And if we really manage to get to that depth, then we have a beginning, a principle of compassion, of intelligence, of cooperation, of wholeness, which we desperately need. Is that enough of a sermon for this evening? Yes? Okay. So we can ask questions, and as Shailesh kindly indicated, he said, just make your question brief, make it to the point, and if possible, I would suggest as well, I would add to what Shailesh said, would you, if preferably, ask a question that has to do with your own life in regard to the theme that we have been discussing, where your feeling is also involved. Because it's my sense that only when feeling is involved is there a chance of insight. Only in passion is there insight. So do also bear that in mind.
Yes, thank you, Javier. Please go ahead.
Hello. With respect to conflict, is there a dimension that country plays? That is, can you live in less of a conflict in India versus US or Israel? Or is that so intrinsic that it's only individual and the society around you doesn't make a difference?
That's comparative conflict. Okay, we can make comparisons, yes. I wouldn't, for the life of me, wish to be in Gaza now. That's for sure. And, you see, look. And yes, the United States, poor thing. Power, Krishnamurti said power is evil. And yet we all seek it. It's a disease that humanity suffers from, but will not get rid of. It's like an addiction. So power is a problem. But that problem, you have it here as well. India, I would wish, for sure, you see that there are different places where violence is at least less, for sure. We have to make at least that much of a point, no? Not to be violent ourselves. In India, at least, there has been a culture which has spoken directly and openly about that. Don't be violent. I haven't heard that in my schooling. So, look, culture has a role, has an important role. So I very much would be for that, and I'm sympathetic to that. But I started talking about this partly by saying that I saw a movie, and although it was a movie, and therefore they do whatever they want with the script and distort history the way they like, including the image of Krishnamurti, India's has been a violent history, pre-British and post-British, and during. So there you have it, because we're violent. And our ideals are part of our violence, because they're the same duality between what we are and what we should be. See, that's just the pity of it. It would be simple, wouldn't it? We could just have an ideal and says, yes, we're going for it, and that transforms us. But it doesn't. It doesn't. Violence is much more primary. It goes deeper than culture. That's the problem for mankind. We have to get to a very deep level of consciousness. It's not just your culture or my culture. It's human conditioning at a very deep level, having its roots in our animal background, and we have to face it. Past culture, past the veneer of civilization, we have to meet the primary roots of violence. But the primary roots of violence are in the primary roots of self. We have to meet ourselves. We have to meet that construct that has become the alienation from others and from ourselves, and is at the root of all this violence. Look, I said at the beginning that partly it's the attempt to throw light on current events, right? So what is happening, you can see it very much. I studied this whole issue of Gaza and Israel, such a catastrophic thing. You can see the tragedy of it, the absolute tragedy that the people who were seeking their own salvation and security are causing this genocide. There's no other word for it, and I'm afraid I'm not just inventing it. I have the backing of the UN Special Rapporteur, Francesca, forget what her name. She wrote any number of reports to which nobody's listening. Nobody's listening. That this is genocide and there's no other word for it. And the Convention on Genocide of the UN was written after the Holocaust, so that that would never happen again. And who's committing genocide now? So the victims of genocide from yesterday are the perpetrators of it today. You see, there's no division, there's no distinction. It's always the identity, the search for security in an idea. This is an idea. Race is an idea, religion is an idea, nation is an idea. We're killing each other for ideas because we have become those ideas. You see the absurdity. We don't meet each other even at the biological level anymore because we're living in the psyche, trapped in images. We are lived by images, we live for images, and we kill for them. We are out of our minds. We really have to wake up to that simple, direct, insightful fact. We are living in images, and as long as we do, we're separating ourselves and generating conflict. So, look to your life, my friend. Check if you are living in images, if you're giving importance to yourself, if you're discriminating against others, if you're exploiting anyone, telling lies and seeking your own profit. We must look to our lives. We must look to our own consciousness as it actually happens in relationship. This is our life, this is the world, and this is where we can find out what we are, from where we are, and whether we are creating order, peace, compassion, cooperation, or the opposite. This is our responsibility, and that's where Krishnamurti will always put us. It's up to you.
My question is about ambition and success in life.
Ambition and success?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, if one has to be ambitious and success, there is a certain amount of aggressiveness and violence is involved implicitly. So, both internally and externally. So, the question of how is the unintelligent question. So, my observation is what is to be. What should be whether one should be ambitious and forego the method, or there is a conflict.
What is the conflict?
Conflict is, we want to avoid the violence, we want to avoid the aggressive approach. At the same time, you want to be ambitious and success in life. So this is a conflict.
No, it's not a conflict. It's a natural consequence. If you want to be ambitious, go ahead. But you know that ambition means conflict. So you have to accept conflict. You can't have it both ways. See, everybody is wanting to eat keep their cake and eat it too. We can't. Either you are truly aware of the fact that ambition leads to conflict and violence, and therefore you are at ease with it, and you say, yes, because for me ambition is more important, success is more important, everybody's doing it, and if I don't do it, I'll end up in the gutter, or whatever it is. So you have accepted violence. The moment you accept ambition in the way you're describing it, you're accepting violence. And the dream of non-violence is just a plaything. It's just a moral distraction to cover up the actuality. This is what everybody's doing in the world. All countries, all politicians are lying about the fact that they are ambitious, and then they talk of peace. You can't. Either you are aware of the consequences, and therefore you accept violence, or you drop non-violence and peace, drop it, because it has no meaning. Where there is division, there is conflict. Ambition is division, because you're climbing the ladder at the expense of others, and in comparison and competition with others, for resources, position, and all the rest. Right? So, if that's the fact, you have to stay with the fact. This is what Kay says. The fundamental discipline of human transformation is to stay with facts. And that is the fact. The other is non-fact. The ideal of, I don't want to be violent, I shouldn't be non-violent. That's what society keeps telling us, right? But society, meanwhile, is telling us, be violent, be ambitious, be greedy. That's how we will recognize your worth. Thus will you become somebody, away from that fear, universal fear of not being anything or anyone. So, don't even accept that conflict. There's no conflict, because there's only one fact. Ambition equals violence. This is what you are the moment you enter into that dynamic. I mean, I'm not talking about you personally, please. This is not personal, right? But that is the fact. Stay with that. See the consequences of it. Become responsible for your actions. This is what it's about. Let's be responsible for your action. Let's stop playing this game of hypocrisy. The governments are playing it. Yeah, peace, peace, peace. War, war, war. See, the war is the fact. Peace is a whitewash. They're trying to whitewash it. They have ideals, human rights, this blah, blah, blah. It's all blah, blah. At the end is hardcore power, violence, exploitation, ambition, and greed. You have to tackle those facts. Stay with those facts. They will reveal their nature if we stay with them. This is critical. This is very critical for all of us to learn that fundamental, simple discipline. Kay would say, where there is self-interest, there is the beginning of corruption. When you deviate from what is, that is also the beginning of corruption. Corruption is to move away, to break the integrity of the fact. And one of the things that it does, that breaks the integrity of the fact, is the ideal. Then you create an opposite. And we keep distracting ourselves with those. You see, we'll keep swinging. It's a swing, a psychological, ideological, moral swing. But we keep exactly where we were. We haven't moved anywhere at all. And therefore, our discipline, the learning, is to stay with what is. Stay with your violence, stay with your ambition, see the consequences of it, and become responsible for them. You want to be violent, but know what you have, what you are going to expect, what you're going to get. It's cruelty, barbarism, and sorrow.
In the world of AI and machine learning, sir, I have a conflict with embracing it, or they say like we have to coexist with this in the future. So I have a conflict with coexisting with the machine and without division.
I don't understand.
Do we need to embrace it, or do we need to divisive with the machine and artificial intelligence?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand what this mission is.
So this
Machine, a machine. Excuse me, my understanding of Indian pronunciation is not always the best. You have a conflict with the machine? What? With artificial intelligence? What? Say it again, please, because I didn't quite understand.
We are, like it or not, we are in the age of artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And super intelligence that are coming up.
Yes.
And I have conflict with machine. But in the world, they say we have to coexist. And the near future, the peers are not going to be humans. It is going to be machine. I find it difficult to divide it. Whereas, should I embrace it? That's my question.
Should you embrace the machine?
How to live with machine without conflict, sir?
Yes. Okay, well, what's the conflict with the machine? What's the conflict with the machine?
The machine is trying to kind of overtake humans and try to, the powers in which the US and China, who are the pioneers in the machine, are trying to control the world using those machines, collecting our data.
So it's not the machine that's trying to control the world. It's the people who are using these machines, right? Now, artificial intelligence, he saw it coming. That was the beauty of Kay. He had such a profound vision of where we are at and where we're going. It's unbelievable. So he saw the computer thing happening, the computer revolution, and how the machine, like you call it, and we should call it, was just taking over, just taking more domains for itself. But you see, the machine is us. So you call it the machine and we think it's something out there. But it's not. It's us. We made the machine in the image of thought. See, that's another thing. To consider that what this machine is a processor. Very fast, incredibly, it's a very interesting challenge. If you look at it, sometimes poetically, I give myself some license, poetic license, and I think, aha, you see, knowledge is there and it can be processed by a machine. So you type, a friend of mine says, look how good, check it out. You tell me if it's good or not. I typed in and says, give me the essence of Krishnamurti's teachings. And the machine, GPT, whatever it goes, chat GPT, in 2 minutes or something, or a few seconds, Krishnamurti's teachings, and he was very good, as far as I could tell. I don't call myself an expert or anything, but he was pretty good. I said, what? Because the information is there, and now it catches on to the language. There are language models, right? So the language, the machine doesn't understand a thing. It's a machine. The one who understands is the human mind. But the machine will never understand the human mind because it has no mind. So we have to awaken past the mechanicalness of knowledge to the awakening of intelligence. That's what Kay said. The fullness of humanity, of being human, is not to know and handle knowledge, but to have insight, to develop and awaken that quality of timeless perception. And the first thing we have to understand is the place of the machine, the place of knowledge, which is not the totality of our lives by any means, because that's again the past. It lives in the past, this poor machine, and it can only deal with what is known. And the known is the limitation of humanity to begin with. What, as we described, is one of the sources of conflict as in our relationship. The machine has no conflict because it doesn't believe in a country at the moment or in any kind of thing, right? It doesn't say me and mine yet. But apparently they're working on it. They want to make a selfish machine. And of course, if a country uses it, that becomes a selfish machine. See, the psychological invariably overcomes the technical. And this is where we have to be very attentive to that. Because the ambitious people, like the gentleman kindly shared with us, will use whatever tools to advance their interest. And the interest is what? Profit, power. The cruelty is in us. The machine is us. The conditioning, ancient conditioning, is driving that other machine. One machine is driving another for its own pernicious purposes. Precisely the challenge is to ourselves be free from the mechanical conditioning of our own consciousness. That is what will undo the machine and put it in its right place. When we are free from greed, violence, and sorrow, the machine will have a lovely purring sound and not be managing the destruction of the forests or of each other. Right? So don't be afraid of the machine. You look to yourself, how you are, and how your conditioning is driving this machine in the wrong direction. That's what the machine will do, what the instructions it receives. Don't give it the instructions that your consciousness in its selfish movement will give it. And that will save us all.
Yes, please.
So, cooperation is one of the words that you said which is very important. In an organizational context, how do we even talk to people about cooperation? Because each individual has their own ideas, and we talk about the vision of an organization and all that. How do we have a dialogue to promote cooperation, if I may say? Thank you.
You see, it comes down to brass tacks. It comes down to the most immediate thing. How do we work together? How do we cooperate in an organization, in a relationship, or whatever it will happen to be? This is a key, you see, because that's what we see. People, we do not cooperate. For me, dialogue is indeed one of the keys to finding cooperation. Because cooperation is the outcome of communication, of sharing the same meaning. If one has an opinion and another has a contrary opinion, then the meaning is not going, there's no communication. So we have to come together and stay with that difference and see whether it has any significance whatsoever. If you and I want to be friends, I can't come to you and say, I believe this thing, totally, but you say, but I don't believe in that. Then that friendship is impossible. We cannot cooperate. We cannot relate. But what is more important? Our relationship as human beings or our beliefs? What is more important when we are to work together? My opinion, your opinion, or the working together? That doesn't mean that we will not say what needs to be said, but we'll say it already in a cooperative spirit, not as me versus you. So we have to question ourselves as invested in our opinions. Everybody is invested in their opinions. And we lose, therefore, the larger picture. That cooperation is much more essential than opinion being mine and sticking to it, than belief. Belief is standing in the way of human cooperation. The attachment to anything is standing in the way. The me and the mine are the fundamental factors of the breakdown of cooperation. But look, that's not so easy. I don't want to sound like, I have a formula or anything. In practice, it's much more difficult, right? Obviously, you've been trying it. So, because how would you separate the me and the mind? You can't. And it's not just conscious me and mind. It's an unconscious me and mind. See? And that is how to get there is a subtle process. So it has to be approached very kindly, because we're all hurt. And we all have something to defend and to protect ourselves from and to pursue, to compensate for our deeper inner hurts. See, it gets subtle. But organizations should be actually take the human being as a whole much more to heart. That's part of it. It's sort of the function and the purpose of the organization take over, and everybody becomes a cog in the machine. That's what society generally also does. We are cogs in the machine, and therefore we are not respected as such. So that quality of attention to the person as a whole, however implicit it might be, and to pay attention to how their situation is important. We are human beings first, and everything else second, Kay used to say. And that is very important, to reverse that order of being first a cog in the machine and a human being in your own private time. I'm not accepting that mechanical approach. We are human beings first, and we are that universality first. That's our relationship. Relationship is the ground of all cooperation, whether it is in an organization or otherwise. But we have to communicate. We have to communicate in that open way, without authority, in the spirit of friendship. If we're capable of doing that, we have made quite a beginning of change, which we need.
How to understand all these philosophies from a victim's perspective? If people are, taking guns on you,
Yes.
will you say we are non-divisive and we are the same consciousness?
Quite right. Look, I think most of us have seen these pictures of what's happening in these wars, and particularly, again, I cannot get them out of my mind, the pictures about the children in Gaza. I mean, if there is no feeling in our hearts, we're dead about that, right? What would I tell one of these children? I saw a picture of one child that made me cry. It was a little boy. His family wiped out. And he's carrying something in his hands and said, I just want to get out of here. I want me to be left alone. And the boy has nowhere to go. And you are there watching television in the comfort of your Western world. What the dickens is happening? You understand? What am I going to say to that boy? I, the philosopher of non-duality. I can't. The only thing I can do if I was there is embrace this boy and say, come, live with me. There's shelter here. Let's see if we can heal your wounds, your deep inner wounds. Will that child ever overcome those wounds? All you can do is, one, point out this truth, because you cannot avoid it. Behind that horrible situation, that wounded child, that destroyed human being, even if he survives, will be destroyed, most likely. There is this human horror of consciousness being in a contradiction with itself. That's what made the Israelis. That's what made the Palestinians. That's what made that fence. That was made those bombs. And that is thought. And thought is what you and I do. We think. We are responsible. We have to assume our responsibility for that boy's predicament. We are behind the whole movement with our selfishness. I can't tell that boy that, but I have to take responsibility for me. And I may be, if that boy and I should meet, we can talk about this as well. To understand, to rise above the circumstances that have condemned him to that suffering, and go himself past those divisions. Hurt is also the result of division from within. It is not just the body and the trauma that you receive, but a lot of it is just the memory of hurt, the image. The Jews are profoundly hurt. And it is that hurt that's making them violent. See the issue. That we have to be free from hurt. And the Palestinians now are hurt by the Jews, by the Israelis. One hurt leads to another. And it's a perpetual movement. This is a perpetual chain. And where would you break it? You have to break it, one, don't hurt. But two, once you are hurt, can you be free from hurt? This is what we have to tell that boy. We will provide you with the necessary conditions to see if you can be free from hurt. We will not be violent. And when you find your violence in yourself that comes from that hurt, see if you can be free from hurt also, because otherwise you will be like them, like the victimizers. See, this is the difficulty. We can't react that way, and yet our conditioning, even as hurt, as victims, will continue the violence. See, isn't that the case? We're all victims, aren't we? We've all been victims of violence, of mistreatment, abandonment, trauma. You know, the whole thing now that everybody's talking about trauma. But that's a real thing, okay? Maybe it's a little bit of propaganda, a little bit of momentary fashionable topic. Society entertains itself also with, momentary fashionable topics. But this is something universal, and it is important to raise our awareness as to the fact that we are all hurt. If we were to realize that, then our responsibility is immense, because then we must not. The very fact of hurt, that we are hurt and suffering, imposes upon us the responsibility of not hurt another. But hurt, the tendency is to hurt. That's why we have to go into it together. We have to find out what's the root of hurt so that we don't hurt another. See, you and I have that responsibility, right? And he too, unfortunately, see, the victim now is responsible for his victimhood and to be free from that victimhood, not to be a victim. That no matter how he's a victim of violence, inwardly he might not be a victim at all. And that's very difficult. That's an art. It's a profound art. You see, Krishnamurti, this is a mystery to me, and I don't know the answer, and I am not giving you an answer, actually. You see, the question remains, and is a very valid one. But remember, Krishnamurti, as a boy, was beaten in school, was, just caned, because he was a bit of a retard, apparently. Couldn't retain knowledge in the typical way, and couldn't pass his exams, right? He used to sometimes joke about himself and says, I'm one of those idiots, sir. The sort of, the French call it idiot savant, right? The people who are sort of a bit like this, but they suddenly one day start playing the piano and they play it perfectly, right? So he was sort of the voice of truth, but mentally he was a retard. Now, that's why he was beaten. But the boy wasn't hurt. And yet he was a victim of the most amazing mistreatment, like most of us have been in one way or another, haven't we? Right? So now we're all victims. What do we say? Right? The question comes to us. See, that's part of the beauty. We are actually in that boy's place. We are victims. Are we learning what that means? What that hurt means? And are we finding the way of freedom from that victimhood? Because the victimhood is just now the hurt, the memory of that hurt, which has become part and parcel of our psychological identity. We have to go down to that level of the psychological hurt and see about being free from it by staying with it to the depth of it. And then we may stop being victims and we can embrace that boy, and maybe that quality can communicate itself as well. Because we will be changing the world. See? If you and I stop being victims, we will stop being violent also. And then we'll create a world in which such a boy can find a home. And that's what we must do.
Sir, so what does consciousness and non-violence mean to a person who don't have a shelter or food? Does class and privilege plays a roles in that? And the second thing is that K never my understanding towards K is that because since you asked us to ask question from our own experience, that I understood that we become what we hate. So K never asked me to hate any traditions or culture, but question it, question the authority in it. Because there are a lot of conflicts happening too around the understanding of teachings of K itself, because I don't call it teaching, but rather speaking directly to us. So these are the two questions. Thank you.
Repeat them again.
The first question is that what is consciousness and non-violence means to a person who don't have food or shelter? Does class and privilege plays a role in it? And the second question is that since we become, we become what we hate, so K never asked us to kind of hate but question the authority around traditions and culture. So I just want to understand how it is misinterpreted, or like the second question is more about how to read or understand K itself in the contemporary times. Thank you.
Right. Well, you can see we're trying to do the latter anyway together this evening. But what does consciousness and non-violence, thank you, mean to a person who has no food or shelter? And what role does class play a role in that? Obviously, class plays a role. Class or caste in India is a tremendous role in division. They are divisions, and there are stratifications, hierarchical stratifications of society, which imply exploitation of one group by another. There's alienation of our humanity in these divisions. Some people, to the point that some people are untouchables. You understand what that means? And yet it's all tradition, very nicely, sophisticatedly explained and justified. Wait a minute, who the Dickens came up with that? We all want privilege. We all want to be superior. And society, following on the monkey business in our background, has organized itself along the hierarchical principles. And then the comparisons. One is better than others, and one lives off another. You know, boy, before coming, I had on my shelf the book of Manu. It should be read by everybody, and probably most of you are familiar with it. But it's part and parcel of a Hindu tradition. And the language they use is essentially the chain of, how you say, of eating. Who eats who? Is a horrible, forgive me, I do not mean to put any tradition or anything down, but you just have to read the language to realize that they accept that somebody is going to live off another. Is that religion? Is that culture? No, I don't believe it. I don't agree with that. But you can see that that has been one of the human struggles, to find equality, to find the sharing of the human condition together, that it is one earth, it is one humanity, and it is one consciousness. And we don't seem to get that through. It is you and me, and you belong there, and I belong here. Positioning. And therefore the resources, who works for whom, and so on. Of course, we have functions, and we must have functions. There's a bus driver, and there's a professor of philosophy. There's a physicist working in the radiation lab, and there's a doctor in his clinic or whatever, and there's a teacher in the school, and there is the cleaner that comes at night to clean the offices and so on and so forth. There are functions. But does your function create status? What is the principle of status? Kay used to say, as human beings, and he addressed the educators particularly, but he addressed all of us. As human beings, we have no status. The beauty of that, just sense the beauty of that, the implicit compassion also in it, because then you're not going to use another for your own profit, pride, profit and pleasure. See, the three principles, the three P's of human consciousness and of bourgeois society. You're looking for pride, profit and pleasure. No, you're not going to use anybody. Relationships of use and convenience are no relationships at all. And we are in this world together. It is our world, not yours and mine. Humanity is not me and you, separated by country, ideology, belief, and all that, historical, residual aspects of history, but we are one. And consciousness is shared by all humanity. Isn't it not the consciousness of the West and the consciousness of the East? Your consciousness, my consciousness. That's a relative little superficial description. It's like little ripples in a pond. But you have to look at the pond. And we're all connected deep down by the same stream of consciousness, by the same stream of violence and sorrow, by the same stream of time. And that's where we all have to work together to see if there is a profound insight into it and freedom from it. This is our purpose, really, as human beings in this life. We have a tremendous responsibility because we have inherited this conditioning that is destroying us. We are responsible for it. We are the makers of it. Can we undo it?
Sir, one question, sir. One question.
I think we'll go on for one more question and we'll perhaps close the event after that.
Sir,
So please go ahead. Yes.
Sir, to diagnose any problem, whether it's internal or external, two things are there. One is cause and effect. Unless we understand cause and its effect of the problem, we cannot understand the whole, isn't it?
You
And
cannot see the whole.
The problem is we don't analyze this problem in terms of effect and cause. That is the major reason for all the problems. That is what I see. Will the Krishnamurti accept it? But most of the people don't apply it. Our reasoning ability or inquiring mind. We don't go with the inquiring mind. That is the problem. I want to know how Krishnamurti help us to understand the problem.
How does Krishnamurti understand this?
Help
Us to understand the problem.
To understand the problem. Any problem.
Any problem?
Yes.
Yeah, Krishnamurti's
How
approach.
does Krishnamurti help us?
Yeah. There's actually, you see, one, Krishnamurti had 3 steps, if I recall, to solve any problem. Curiously enough, no? Krishnamurti never offering any method, any system, any nothing. He said, I can solve any problem in 3 days. What? You said it takes no time. What are you doing? Now it suddenly comes 3 days. Very precise, 3 days. Give me 3 days and I solve any problem. Now he said, all right, we're very interested. 3 days, we all have 3 days. So let's see. Now, he said, first, you analyze it. You look at it. You look at the, analyze in the sense of, not quite analysis. He didn't want analysis, but you examine it. You look at it. You look at all the factors that go into it, the sense of, what possible causes, right, that you were mentioning. What does it come from? So you have a problem of what? Self-pity. And so you start looking at it. Where did it come from? What is this one? Well, I was beaten as a child, bullied as a child. My father was aggressive. I'm hurt and like this. But then you have to come to the point that, of course, that doesn't solve it. All that does is sort of opens up the spectrum of the problems, the context of the problem, the nature of the problem. But then the key is to stay with it without movement. So that the problem itself, not you, you're not acting. There's no you acting on it. There's an attention of such a quality, what you call choiceless attention, awareness, such that there's no deviation at all from it. Because we don't have answers to our real problems. Do you realize that? That's a beautiful thing, which invites creativity on our part. But the problem would only reveal its content if there is no imposition from the observer. But there has to be the intensity, the intent to find out. But it's an intent that has no projection of a solution upon it. Because in fact, we don't know the answer to the problem. The answer is in the problem. The problem has to reveal its answer. There has to be an insight. That insight can only be generated out of the staying with the problem without any budging from it. That's the discipline. I'm not sure if there was a third step. I think there were 3. But I remember these 2 distinctly. So, voila. If you wanted something from K, this is what I recall. You have any problem? Do that. Treat it. Try to find an answer psychologically and you will find no answer. Try to see the scope of it, but at the end you've come to the point at which you have no answer. But the urgency to find out and to discover is still there. The energy. See, energy is key to all this. We are fragmenting the energy, but insight can only be precipitated when the energy is one and there is no fragmentation. Then intelligence acts. Insight comes. It's not 100% because it's not causal, but without that energy, there is no insight. We have to come therefore to that point of sharp, concentrated is not a word that Krishnamurti will use, but condensed, intense, sharp energy. Insight is like a laser beam. If you ever have an insight into a problem, it's like a laser beam. It goes zoop. You almost see it. It's light. It's light. But it's light of intelligence. And it sees through whatever. For one thing, it sees through fear. Can see through the cloud, dark cloud of fear, to the bottom, to the nothingness it is escaping from. See? This is what we need exactly in the kind of picture I painted this evening, concerning the fundamental contradiction that lies at the source of all conflict. This escape, this through fear from the nothingness, our fear of nothingness. Insight is necessary, and it will only happen if we concentrate that energy and it can go through that fear and see actually what it is escaping from. And what it sees is that we are that nothingness, and that we're escaping from is our own being. And therefore, fear stops. And becoming stops. Hey, this is an invitation for all of us to experiment with that. Take any problem, because there is this, you see, the concreteness of our lives is involved in all these problematics. All of us have problems of this inward nature. I'm not talking about, problem of getting from here to there or making money or whatever it is. That has to be solved at its own level. Talking about this inner problem and these fundamental issues that we have in our existence and that consciousness has with itself. That needs that quality of energy and insight. Only that will penetrate the different layers of obfuscation that thinking consciousness is doing. And we need that. But that requires that quality of discipline of not escaping from the fact and therefore not giving false answers. The world and we ourselves are giving false answers to keep things kind of quiet. But that's not an answer. The answer is in the problem, is in the perception of the problem, and only insight will get to that point. Not thinking it alone, but thinking has to exhaust itself and therefore cancel itself out and enter into, open that space of not knowing, in which the energy is already not divided because there's no knower fighting with the fact. The fact itself is generating its own energy for its own transformation. Okay? But these are words, huh? You will have to test it.
Thank you very much, Javier. Perhaps we'll bring it to a close right now. I would like to thank you for laying bare the whole structure of violence, large-scale industrial violence, as well as the violence in our own lives, in our own relationships. And it has become such a grave and vast problem in our times. And I think you have laid bare the whole psychological structure of it and pinpointed our own responsibility in this matter. So thank you. I'd like to thank the audience also for coming for this talk and for sharing their questions with us. So thank you and good evening. Good night.
Thank you.